once I get your transfer.
Okay.
And then if you would just
I printed it out
acknowledge
just in
it
case.
with me, and then,
Okay.
you know, as long as I don't break in the line or hang up on you and call you back, then just assume everything's okay. Does that sound good? But you will want to mute yourself once we, you know, after we do the test until you get close to the time. All right, great. So just bear with me. I'm going to put you on speaker for a moment, and then I'm going to get your
His name's Phil, right?
Sorry.
Phil?
Yeah. It may have already rang through. We might not be able to hear it because it's kind of loud.
Yeah. Phil?
Yes,
Okay, great. If you could just mute yourself until the presentation, that'd be great.
will do. I'm going now.
Thank you.
Good deal. Thanks, Corey.
I think I stole a pen. I don't know whose it is.
Oh, that's okay.
It's warm in here too. Fully stocked just in case.
I'll pray you this tonight.
I know. That's good.
Usually I have a few.
Okay. Okay, I will. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. It is Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. I'd like to call the meeting of the Peoria City Council to order. I'd like to welcome everyone in our City Council chambers, as well as Brady Johnson and our listening audience at WCBU. I'd also like to welcome the audience watching through cable channel 22. Clerk, the council mics are open. Can you please call the roll?
Lee,
Present.
for Allen, Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Graham, Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Jensen, Councilmember Kelly, Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach,
Here.
Councilmember Recreagle,
Present.
and Councilmember Velpula.
Present.
We have a quorum present, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind everyone of some of the dates that we have set for some special council meetings. One of those is next Tuesday, a special county meeting regarding the biennial budget and other business matters. We also have a meeting on Tuesday, October the 26th, a public hearing regarding the budget. On November 2nd, all Tuesdays, a special city council meeting regarding the budget. And on November 16th, a special county meeting regarding the budget. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to please join me and stand for a moment of silence or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To share 3 proclamations with you today. The first is a recognition of National White Cane Safety Day, October 15th. And we have Paula Balistrieri, the Operations Manager for the Central Illinois Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Paula, can you come to the front? Right there. Whereas the City of Peoria recognizes that all residents have the right to equality, opportunity, independence, and freedom. And whereas we recognize that our blind and visually impaired neighbors possess the same rights as they pursue employment, recreation, and full participation in the economic and social life of our city. And whereas the long white cane, a tool used by our blind and visually impaired neighbors, is used to travel freely, independently, and safely throughout our community. Whereas in 1931, the long white cane with the red tip was developed by a Peoria Lions Club member, George Bonham, for his friend Elmer Thomason, who ran a newsstand on the corner where the Pier Marquette now stands. George had noticed the trouble Elmer had crossing the street, and that prompted him to design a cane that was noticeable to motorists and other pedestrians. And whereas the next year, Peoria became the first city in the country to pass an ordinance giving bearers of long white cane the right-of-way to cross streets. And whereas in 1975, President Gerald Ford declared October 15th as National White Cane Safety Day. Now therefore I, Rita Ali, Mayor of the City of Peoria, and on behalf of the Peoria City Council, join the Central Illinois Chapter for the Blind and Visually Impaired and the Peoria Lions Club to hereby acknowledge October 15th as National White Cane Safety Day. Balistrary.
Madam Mayor and Council, thank you so much for doing this. I'm very happy to be representing the Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We're small. We've been in Peoria since 1955. We are funded by grants and gifts, but we support and provide resources for what we believe is an underserved segment of our area, adult blind and visually impaired individuals. I'd like to invite you to our White Cane celebration and recognition this Friday, October 15th, at Tower Park. We're going to do long white cane demonstrations because you just don't go out with a white cane. You do have to be fitted for it. You have to be trained on how to use it and learn, the best way for it to assist you in your mobility if you're blind or visually impaired. So we'll have demonstrations about the white cane. We also will have demonstrations on guide dogs. We have patrons that we serve that have guide dogs, and they too are specially trained, so we'll have some demonstrations on how an animal, or not a pet, but a guide dog can help our blind and visually impaired people. That event is Friday afternoon, starting around 3. We'll last till 7. We've got music, food trucks, our live demonstrations, and if you so choose, we'd love to see you out there. It's just a fun day. It's free. Please join us. If you want to actually experience what it's like being blind, I gave you packets. There's a vision simulator card in there. You hold it up and you'll see what it's like. Well, you'll not see what it's like. Well, you'll kind of see what it's like, but there's different eye conditions so that you can experience what a person that actually has those conditions experiences. And we have what we call Dinner in the Dark on November 4th. Visit our website. That information is in your packet. If you choose to attend, we provide vision occluding glasses, and basically you eat your meal just like a blind person would. So again, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council. I hope that you're very proud of the work that we do. I know we're proud to be in Peoria.
Thank you, Paula. We're very proud. Our next proclamation recognizes the Heart of Illinois United Way for 100 years of community impact. And we have the president of Heart of Illinois United Way, Jennifer Zamuto, as well as the board chair, Robert Branfus, who are going to come up front. And after I read the proclamation, we'll hear from Council Member Sid Rodrigo, who serves currently as a board member. So we'll hear from you first, Councilman, and then we'll hear from the representatives. Whereas since October 18th, 1921, the Heart of Illinois United Way has brought the residents of our community together to care for one another. And whereas through their Community Impact Fund and partner agencies, the Heart of Illinois United Way invests in local education, financial stability, and health needs to enable the people of Central Illinois to earn livable wages, increase independence, and improve wellness at all ages. And whereas our United Way, whether it be in times of war, natural disasters, health crises, and more, has proven it is built to support the people of our hometown no matter the challenge. And whereas the Heart of Illinois United Way knows we are better together and stronger united. Since its founding, our United Way has engaged volunteers and community leaders from across Central Illinois to ensure the fundamentals of safe and stable lives are available to all individuals in our community. Whereas over the past 100 years, the Heart of Illinois United Way has raised more than $337 million through the generosity of the people who call our area home. Using data, our United Way continually leverages these donations to guarantee our local network of health and human care services remains strong and provide the greatest return on the community's charitable investments. And whereas, as the Heart of Illinois United Way celebrates 100 years of community impact this year, the organization's history is a chronicle of who we as a community are now, who we were, and how we have evolved to support the community we all call home. Now, therefore, I, Rita Ali, Mayor of the City of Peoria, and on behalf of the Peoria City Council, do hereby congratulate the Heart of Illinois United Way for 100 years of community impact in Peoria, Illinois. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, your proclamation is I think, a really good recap of what the Heart of Illinois United Way has meant for our area. And for so many times, people look towards the city to be able to solve all of our community's problems. And while we can do a lot, and we continue to do as much as we can, a lot of the situations that we face as a community are broader than just the city. And we've got to have our community partners to be able to do it, because our community needs don't just end at our city lines. They are for our full community. And even if they did end at our city lines, it takes all of us here to be able to help solve and make Peoria a better place. And the Heart of Illinois United Way works on that each and every day through a dedicated staff, board, and a host of volunteers that it's amazing the hours that are put in every year. Last year alone, they raised $9.1 million that were reinvested back into outcome-based programs that helped change lives, everyday lives, right here in our area. And I think this year, we know the impact that COVID has had, and we know that the need is out there. And our community has always been generous. It's why the Heart of Illinois United Way is one of those that is looked on from all across the country as one of the best and most giving areas. And we want to make for sure that we exceed last year's total campaign. I'm so proud to be able to congratulate both of you on the hard work that you've done and the leadership that you bring forward. There is a lot of people that have helped make this happen, and your leadership to continue to make for sure that each and every one of them is recognized, I think, is so important. Happy anniversary. I know it's going to be a great year as we sort of celebrate those things in the past, but also look in the future. And I think one more thing for the community to really understand is that there are really three key areas that the Heart of Illinois is really dedicated towards, and they are education, health, and financial stability. The same things that we probably talk about in this chamber each and every meeting. And thank you for being our partner in a community that can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Mayor Ali. I really appreciate your help both with the proclamation and to Chuck Gribb as well for his help on our street naming. We've learned so much about our organization this past year as we look through our history. And actually, our very first office was here at the City Council building in room 102, for the first 20 years that we were in existence. So after that, we were up over on High Street, and we're so excited to be here with you all today. The Heart of Illinois United Way has proven that we are built to support Central Illinois in times like these, no matter the challenge. And we don't do this work alone. This certainly is not just about the people that work in our office, but it's about the volunteers and donors and incredible companies that support us year over year. And we couldn't do any of this work without them. We have a very small staff. As we celebrate decades of support from our volunteers and donors this year, it's really our responsibility to look back and to continue to drive change now and into the future. We wouldn't be here today without you all. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey. I do have to say, Stacy she forced me to say she gave you your pledge forms today, and hopefully you'll fill those out. I didn't want to say that part. Thank you all so much. We are so proud to partner with the city and everyone that works here. This is a community effort. We want to do everything we can to put ourselves out of business. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Branfus?
I can't top that.
Thank you all for your leadership. Thank you very much. Our final proclamation recognizes 22 VA Day. I'm not sure whether we have representatives. Yes, we do. We have Michael Reagan, founder of 22 VA, retired Navy veteran, and possibly Troy Phillips.
He's on my camera.
He's on the camera. 22 VA photographer, also a retired Marine veteran. The proclamation reads, whereas 22 VA was founded on the facts that September is Suicide Awareness Month and 22 veterans a day commit suicide. Whereas 22 VA helps those in need by raising awareness and connecting people with organizations that can provide help, thereby reducing the number of suicides. And whereas 22 VA also seeks to make an impact by connecting those in the community in need of support with art and horticultural therapy. Both have shown to make positive outcomes in the lives of veterans. Whereas I encourage all community members to take advantage of the resources available from 22 VA. Now therefore I, Rita Ali, Mayor of the City of Peoria, do hereby recognize 22 VA for their contributions and proclaim September 22nd, 2021 as 22 VA Suicide Awareness Day.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Welcome.
Council, appreciate the help here. We're a fledgling non-for-profit, so we don't have all the bells and whistles a lot do, but we're trying to make a difference here. And 2006, I retired from the Navy. In 2007 was the first time I actually got to work with our distinguished mayor at Illinois Central College on the diversity group. You might remember me carrying a little baby up to speak one time because I was going through a nasty divorce. So veterans have a lot of things that people don't think about. It's not all combat. Suicide rate's higher, the divorce rate's higher, deployments, back-to-back deployments, my last deployment being 16 months straight, and this is my daughter's first and second birthday. It's a lot of things that veterans deal with, and we don't necessarily always want to talk about it. Sometimes I found it really helpful to express myself with art, get things out of my head in a constructive way. And living in Japan for 7 years, I got to learn a philosophy as well as an art form called kintsukuroi, where you take a piece of broken pottery and you put it back together with gold lacquer, and the gold fills in all the cracks. The philosophy behind it is that something is more beautiful for having been broken. That being said, I think that speaks to a lot of veterans and non-veterans, and we've been partnering with the Peoria Public Library. This will be our 7th annual show. It's going to be November 8th to January 5th, and we will have a reception November 20th. I'm going to give some of these to Stacy to get to everybody, so that make sure to give you an invite. And if anybody wants personal tours, I know a few people in here I've given personal tours of the art show before. Be happy to do that again. Once again, thank you for the support, and please help us to help our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan. Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for creating this support system for our veterans. Moving on, Madam Clerk.
We are at the minutes.
Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I move to approve the minutes of the City Council meeting held on September 28th, 2021 as printed.
Seconded by Councilmember Jackson. Any comments or questions? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
We have one town item, 21-303, is a request from the town officials to approve the September 2021 actual expenditures and to approve the October 2021 anticipated expenditures for the town of the City of Peoria.
Councilmember Graham?
Thank you, Mayor Lee. We do have Township Supervisor for General Assistance, Latrina Leary, here in the chamber if there are any questions that need to be posed this evening. But to get things rolling, I would like to make a motion to approve the actual expenditures for September and to approve the October 21 anticipated expenditures as outlined.
Seconded by Councilmember Kelly. Any discussion, questions?
Mayor Ali, Latrina, could you hold there she is right there. Thank you very much for coming, and it's always good to have you here if there are any questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
We are at the consent agenda. 21-304 is a communication from the Mayor and Corporation Counsel with a request to approve the declaration of local state of emergency. 21-303 is a communication with a request to approve and authorize the execution of a 3-year contract with Power DMS to provide policy and compliance management software in an amount not to exceed $33,198.89. 21-306 is a communication with a request to approve a sole source contract with Dr. E. Anthony White for research partner services under the 2020 Bureau of Justice Assistance Strategies in Policing Innovation Grant through September 30th, 2023, in an amount not to exceed $50,000. 21-307 is a communication with a request to approve an agreement with Flock Safety, Inc. for access to license plates recognition video database. 21-308 is a communication with a request for the following. A is to approve a contract with Stantec Consulting, Inc. for the implementation of the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity Rebuild Shovel Ready Grant in the amount of $950,000 at 3540 through 3600 Southwest Adams Street and South Lydia Street, formerly known as the Tabor property. And B, adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2021 revised annual budget relating to the capital fund to recognize the receipt of funds from the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity Rebuild Shovel Ready Grant and corresponding expenditures in the amount of $950,000 and the use of the Eagleview TIF fund balance in the amount of $150,000 for non-eligible related expenses. 21-309 is a communication with a request for the following. A, to approve a local agency agreement for the jurisdictional transfer of the city-owned properties in the infield for ramps between War Memorial Drive and Adams Street from the municipal street system to the state highway system. And B, adopt an ordinance for the jurisdictional transfer of parcel ID numbers 14-35-131-001 and 14-35-131-002 in the infield for ramps between War Memorial Drive and Adams Street from the municipal street system to the state highway system. And there is a handout on your desk for an updated ordinance. 21-310 is a communication with a request for the following. A, to approve a 5-year agreement with Axon Enterprises, Inc. for the purchase of an interview room solution for 10 police department interview rooms to include the purchase of hardware, installation, training, software, and associated subscription costs in the amount of $576,730.89. And B, to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2020 to 2021 biennial budget relating to the use of capital fund balance in the amount of $135,346.18 to purchase an interview room solution from Axon Enterprises, Inc. 21-311 is a communication with a request for the following. A, to approve an incumbency certificate and resolution accepting a grant from the Illinois Housing Development Authority for the Land Bank Capacity Program grant in the amount of $250,665. And B is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2021 revised annual budget relating to the capital fund to recognize the receipt of a grant from the Illinois Housing Development Authority for the Land Bank Capacity Program grant and the corresponding expenditures in the amount of $250,665. And there is a handout on your desk with attachment A that goes along with the grant agreement. 21-288 is a communication with a request to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 18 and Chapter 30 of the Code of the City of Peoria related to the elimination of various licenses and miscellaneous business regulations. And that concludes our consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any items to remove from consent? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve? Moved by Councilmember Riggenbach, seconded by Councilmember Euler. Any questions, comments? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
We are at the policy session. 21-312 is a communication from the city manager with a request to hold a policy session on redistricting in response to the 2020 census results.
I open the mics for both you and Council Capusta.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will just open up by saying that we wanted to schedule this evening to have the policy session. And with that, I will turn it over to our Corporation Counsel, Acting Corporation Counsel, to walk us through what we want to try and do tonight. And we do have a special guest with us this evening as well.
Thank you. When Community Development presented all of the numbers at our last meeting, what some of it boiled down to as far as a reapportionment or redistricting goes is that the first district will need to expand by 3,938 people. The second district will need to expand by 1,555 people. The third district will need to expand by 1,113 people. The fourth district will need to contract by 1,329 people, and the fifth district will need to contract by 5,568 people, give or take a percent here or there. In looking at potential options and starting to look at maps, one of the questions that came up for discussion was whether or not the council wanted to consider altering our current structure of district and at-large council persons. And I will say that we did a little bit of comparable research, and just to kind of put Peoria into perspective, we looked at 10 comparable communities that had populations between 55,000 and about 150,000, and only 2 of those cities actually had any at-large council members. And of those 2 cities, one of them had 2 at-large council members, and one of them had 3 at-large council members. For the most part, they largely had defined districts or wards, and they ranged from as few as 5 to as many as 14. For example, Rockford has 14 defined districts. So that is sort of where our research led us. On the phone tonight, we are very lucky to have Phil Lanzini of Kavanaugh, Scully, Sado, White, and Frederick, who is really extremely experienced in redistricting and reapportionment for public bodies. He's currently working with, I believe, the school district on how these new census numbers will affect them. And most importantly, we are lucky enough that he was involved in the voting rights case that the city settled in 1987 and can really give us an overview of how that litigation from 1987 has affected the current structure that we have, and if we were to make any changes to it, what that might look like. So, Phil, are you there?
I am. Good evening.
Good evening. I hope you heard my introduction, and maybe you could start out by giving us just a brief overview of, what really occurred in 1987 that has brought the city council sort of electoral structure to where we are today.
Yes. In 1987, I was the attorney for the Peoria School District and the Peoria Park District that were each defendants in voting rights litigation brought by the same plaintiffs that brought the voting rights case against the city of Peoria. The cases were, practically speaking, consolidated for the entire year for discovery and pleadings. And that brought me into conferences really on a daily basis with the city attorneys as well. eventually, all three of the cases were resolved by settlements. Under the federal court system, those settlements had to be the subject of what are called fairness hearings, and the judge, who at the time was Judge Harold Baker, had to find that the proposed settlements were in the best interest of the communities, obviously agreed to by the plaintiffs, and this was a plaintiff class by that time, and that they were fair. In hindsight, we had questions a number of times, but I won't get into the discrepancies or the differences, or not really discrepancies, differences between the types of settlements the school district and the park district cases had, because they're not relevant to tonight. But there are several aspects of the city of Peoria settlement, because these items, of course, became the substance of the consent decree that was entered by the federal court. That's for without digressing too far, that consent decree has been amended twice. It was amended within a few months at the urging of the what was at the time the Peoria Election Commission, to clarify how the cumulative voting would be taken, and then it was amended, and I was fortunate to represent the city along with some other attorneys about 5 years ago, when we were confronted, if you remember, by an event that was not covered by the consent decree. I don't think it was anticipated by anybody at the time, when, as I recall, one, perhaps two of the councilmen resigned their seats midterm at large to take seats in Springfield. And the midterm elections for the at-large seats and even the primary leading to those candidacies were not attended to by the consent decree. It hadn't been thought of, probably. So we had to go back to the federal court and amend the consent decree with a proposal that was agreed to by the plaintiffs at the time. The judge found fair and entered, and I won't get into that detail because that really hasn't come up otherwise. But what I think would be most useful to the council is for me to focus back on the three elements, at least as I describe it, that are in the consent decree, specifically in what's called the electoral structure for the city council, that was found by the judge in the best interest of the community and in fairness hearing, and became part of the court order. The first is that you are to have 5 single-member districts. The second, which obviously, as Chrissy said, the reapportionment every 10 years with the census data is required by other Supreme Court cases, probably the most famous of which is Baker versus Carr. But the 5 single-member districts are contained or preserved, if you will, in that electoral structure. The second is the 5 at-large seats, and just a bit of history if you're not quite as old as I am. The city of Peoria back in the 60s, I believe, but certainly throughout the 70s and 80s, had what I call a hybrid model. You had 5 single-member districts and 3 at-large seats, and then the mayor, which was also at-large. That had been installed several years before. As a process of the negotiated settlement, that number was increased to 5, and I can describe, at least as best I can conjecture, what all the parties' input to go to 5 from 3 was, if any of you care to ask about that later. But probably the most notorious factor, or the best known factor then, of the consent decree electoral structure was what's come to be called bullet voting or cumulative voting, that for the at-large seats, a voter can use their vote for the weight of 5 if they vote on one candidate, or if they vote on 5 candidates, each would get 1 vote from that voter. So those 3 aspects, and there are other aspects of included in the consent decree, but those are the 3 that I think are most important for the council's consideration. They're somewhat unique to the city of Peoria, as Chrissy already indicated. There are not many, even in the United States, that use cumulative voting. But the problem is, if you'll bear with me, the voting rights litigation shows that when you have at-large delegates and the demographics of minorities in such a fashion that their vote is diluted, and that's why these are called vote dilution cases, that some violation of the voting rights can occur, and because the the vote effect is diluted. That's where the cumulative vote came in. That's where the 5 at-large came in. I'll stop there and ask if there are either further comments or questions, Chrissy.
Attorney Lanzini, it's Rita Ali. You're giving me flashbacks of our time together when I served on the park board. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing your expertise. It's very much appreciated. Are you saying that since the consent decree is still in place today, that in order to change that structure, there would have to be a modification to the consent decree? Is that the case?
Yes, Mayor, and I should say for the record that I count you as a friend, frankly, but you're so much younger than I am in those days. I'm happy that you could remember it. The really serious aspect of that point, though, is that when we went back to the amendments, the very first one from the Election Commission and the one about 5 years ago, those were materially different kinds of amendments in the sense that they were not controversial and not contested. They were filling in gaps that the consent decree hadn't anticipated or appreciated, if you will. The difference, in my view anyway, the difference probably making any further changes difficult is that you're substantively changing these one or more of these 3 elements of the consent decree. For instance, if you focus on the 5 single-member districts, I should tell you that in voting rights litigation generally, it's at large that are the problems, are the challenge. Single-member districts don't dilute votes and aren't, at least by its nature, a violation of the voting rights. And I'll go, if you bear with me, a bit speculative and a bit presumptuous of me, because I obviously do not speak for plaintiffs or the plaintiff representatives or the attorneys. But it's my recollection, almost from the outset, the plaintiffs had proposed the city use 10 single-member districts to replace the hybrid, as I called it earlier, with 10 single-member districts, and that would have been the end of the lawsuit. And that's based on, again, the voting rights case law that basically says single-member districts by nature cannot dilute votes. Of course, you have problems with gerrymandering and compact size and a variety of redistricting challenges, but they're not voting rights challenges. So it's not only that you'd have to amend, you have to propose an amendment, you'd have to persuade the judge that it was fair, it was in the best interest of the community. There would certainly have to be a fairness hearing. And honestly, it strikes me, I didn't mention this, let me back up in reference to Judge Harold Baker. Last I knew, he was still the judge, senior status. He's 92 years old in Urbana. He was certainly our judge 5 years ago, and as far as I know, would be the judge now. At least that's somewhat predictable. If it was some other judge, federal judge, it would be even less predictable what he might think of or she might think of as fair. But we would have, once you open this can of worms, if I can use that metaphor, the result's really going to be unpredictable.
Yeah. Phil, also, to my understanding, there's only one living plaintiff, and that's Miss Joyce Banks. Of those that are now deceased, have they passed on a proxy to someone else that has some voting power in this case?
No, it doesn't work quite like that, Mayor. I don't have immediate contact with Miss Joyce Banks, but you're right. We certainly were in contact 5 years ago. Their attorney, Jim Craven, has passed on, but Don Craven, his son in Springfield, who was a little involved with the original suit and was definitely involved 5 years ago. But it was really in the nature of a class action, and we tried to inform, notify, discuss, explain on behalf of the city a number of minority leaders in the community. And if I didn't include in my initial summary, but the national NAACP was involved with our litigation. Its general counsel at the time was a guy by the name of Dennis Hayes, who actually became executive director for a while after that. So the NAACP was certainly interested in the litigation, and my memory was at the time, 5 years ago, Attorney Don Jackson was president of the local and was involved, and several other leaders of organizations were involved with the change we proposed in respect to the at-large mid-term, partial term election, and they, frankly, from my memory, were important and excellent contributors in the sense that timing was a critical issue then, to get that in place in time for candidates to understand what they were even voting or running for. And they were committed to assisting, so to speak, cooperating. So I think you would have to at least do that, but the problem is it really wouldn't be decisive. It would be necessary but not sufficient in my view.
Thank you. Counsel, what questions might you have for Attorney Lenzini? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Mayor Ali. Hello, Mr. Lenzini. Good to hear your voice. Could you explain what the process would be if the council were going to recommend or they want to go in the direction of changing the structure, I guess, of the council?
Good to see you. The best I could describe it would be this. It would have to be initially the variables would have to be narrowed some in this way. The number or size of the council, that may not sound too important, but I think it really is because of the ramifications. But whether it was to be 8, 10, 12, then the question of whether there would be any involvement at all, or if those would all be single-member districts. If the simplest and really the only simple proposal would be a finite number, all single-member districts, that would take the least amount of outside work, and I'll explain that in a second because that's where the dollar signs are going to magnify big time. But if it was all single-member districts, then I think the influence of the plaintiffs representatives, minority members of the community, And I should inject, I'm sorry to do this publicly in a sense because it's total speculation on my part, but most of the activity in voting rights litigation the last 15 years has been from the Hispanic community. And I know the Peoria Hispanic community has grown. They were not parties to the litigation at all, but they may well be a sizable enough community from the census, the 2021 census, that they have voting rights, vote dilution as well. And so that would influence the drawing of even single-member districts, perhaps. So putting that aside for a moment, if you had anything other than single-member districts, then you get your checkbook out. My estimate of it would be about $400,000 or $500,000 cost, and that's, believe it or not, that's not mostly attorneys. That's mostly expert witnesses of mathematicians and political scientists. When we were in 1987, you spent a little over $700,000, as I recall. Wow. But remember that was split. It was shared between the school district and the park district as well as the city, and the total expense was closer to $2 million. And again, most of that was expert witnesses. You ended up paying the attorneys for the plaintiffs, as is typical under voting rights, as well as your own attorneys. So this can get very expensive if you have to marshal the studies, both by the mathematicians of vote effect and the political scientists, the communities of interest, and prepare their testimony for the fairness hearing.
So I guess, could I just follow up? It's a pretty drawn-out process, not just costly. There would have to be petitions filed or a request for a hearing, and then there'd be a fairness hearing, and there'd be testimony and expert witnesses, and we'd probably also have to study the census, the makeup, the racial makeup of the city, and then don't we also have to get not only approval from the judge or a federal court judge, but also the living plaintiff and possibly the NAACP, as well as others?
That's really a fair summary. I can't say, well, I would say that the input of the plaintiff class prior to the judge's rulings would be the order of things, but that's assuming that it's not hotly contested, right. Because, of course, that could also happen. And if you bear with me, let me say one other thing. You have, in one short site, some time before your next election of aldermen or representatives. But that's really almost deceptive in a sense because I'll put a plug in for my representation of the school district right now. We really need the city election commission, who I've talked with Tom Bright already. We really need the city precincts, voting precincts boundaries, your building blocks, done yesterday. That time is running out because their petitions are due December 14th, and they need to know, what areas they would be running in over there. But otherwise, you'd have generally a year to do the things you were talking about, Beth.
Those petitions are for precinct committee people, Phil?
No, I'm sorry. The petitions I was talking about would be candidates for the school board and park board.
Okay, I thought that election got moved to June versus...
June 28th, yes ma'am, June 28th for purposes of the late census instead of March 15th. But that time is rapidly approaching, and petitions circulate, 106 days prior to, so it's December 14th is the first day to circulate petitions.
Okay.
And then actually for the at-large council seats, they're up for election in 2023. So petitions would be due a year from now,
Correct.
November to December of 2022. So we only would have, and this would have to all take place before that.
You're absolutely right.
So, and your expert opinion, your legal opinion, is that a possibility? Is that doable in this short amount of time? Or in this amount of time?
Well, I think it is possible, but it will be extremely expensive because, of course, as you know, time, the shorter the time, the more the cost. It's largely unpredictable, but it's not as much as a result of the time, so much as a result of the issues. To what you've done, and I wasn't directly involved, I followed it, but I wasn't directly involved with the city's reapportionment, in 2011, when we had, 25 or 30 maps, discussion, that was relatively simple compared to the kind of process I'm describing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Riggenbach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Lenzini, for the perspective that you're offering us. A couple things as a follow-up to Councilwoman Jensen, just for the ones that aren't attorneys. A consent decree basically has no expiration date, correct? So we continue to operate under this, and any changes in the future, now or in 10 years or 20 years, would need to have court approval. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct.
And again, if we could talk about the role of the plaintiffs, they do not have veto power over it, but they would have expert testimony to be provided. Or how would you describe the role of the plaintiffs in the process?
Well, depending on the proposed solution, and if you bear with me to say again, the single-member districts completely on one side and a mixture on the other side, they would have near veto power on the latter, as any litigant. I mean, they would be able to marshal expert witnesses to contest, just as they did in 1987, the results there. Yeah, and there's a certain, I don't know how much you want me to get into this, there's a certain irony at stake here, because you've had 34 years of elections, and we've done better in Peoria, as you can tell, with a diversity of candidates and elections, but all of them are the product of the consent decree. They are not the product of the hybrid system in the 1970s. So it's arguable, and I expect, frankly, the political scientists, expert witnesses that would be retained to have a true divergence of opinions, a real argument between a battle of experts. It's pretty unpredictable. That's the way it's been in other voting rights cases. There's sort of the irony of an imposed settlement or solution that has worked really becomes our contestant or our opponent if we're trying to change it.
And that would lead me to the question that I don't think we're prepared to answer tonight is, has it worked? Has the cumulative voting and the at-large, the hybrid system, as you referenced it, has it worked? And that's where I think it would behoove us to call in Reverend Hightower from the NAACP and even Mr. Jackson and Ms. Banks, the people who were part of this all those years ago, because it would be presumptuous for me to say it worked or it didn't work. I think I would love to hear those who brought this forward, what their view of the Peoria electoral process is now 30, 40 years later. Looking at the mayor's DS, I think we can take certain pride in the progress we've made, but whether or not that's attributed to the electoral system or the changing environment that we have we can debate that for hours too, I'm sure. So I'm really appreciate the discussion. Mr. Lenzini, thank you. And just one additional thought I would have as council contemplates the next steps is I was part of that ad hoc committee 10 years ago that drew the current council boundaries, and I wonder if we should consider doing a committee of the whole or having the at-large members do the drawing. It's difficult to draw your own council boundary, let's be honest. And I think whether it's the whole council or the at-large, that could give us a broader, a cleaner perspective. And the map might look different, but I think that might be worthwhile. So that would just be one other thought I would throw out there as we move forward. So thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Lenzini.
Thank you, Councilman. Mayor, could I make maybe two comments
Yes.
in reference to his comments? I think you didn't use these words, but you bring up, I think, an excellent point that has, to my knowledge, not really happened in the past. Every time this conversation has come up that I've been aware of, it's been in relation to a census production, meaning every 10 years.
Yes.
You definitely have to reapportion your districts in respect to the census. There's no doubt about that. But the discussion and some of the elements you were just commenting on even, and certainly with respect to the voting rights consent decree, are not a 10-year project. That you could, I would really beg you to divorce those two, to separate those two, and address, including all the contacts you meant to the minority community and leaders, divorce that in time, study it however long it takes to study it well and to develop a good proposal. Because if that was 5 years from now, no offense to procrastinate, but if it was 5 years from now and was a good solution, far better than rushing it in the next few months. That's a point you reminded me of, and I think it's well taken. And the other, no offense, Mayor, as I said earlier, I hope and count you as a friend, but I'll use you as an example of your election since Councilman referred to it, and I just wanted to point out that your election was at large. It wasn't the bearer of cumulative voting. It was a perfect example of the way I think we wish the world was, in the sense that it was an at-large election without cumulative voting and not at all a product of the voting rights settlement.
Great point. Thank you. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, but I yield. My question was answered. Thank you.
Other questions from the council? Councilmember Graham?
Esquire Lenzini, on the last note, as per the election results for the mayor, which occurred this past spring, who's to say that we couldn't continue to have the same number of district council people and the same number of at-large people, but we don't have the weighted voting system anymore, but we go with the top 5 vote getters for at-large.
Well, I'll start by calling you Principal, Chuck, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But about all I could say, two spots. One is it would be a change to the consent decree, so it would. I can't say whether it would be controversial or not, or whether the plaintiffs would think it was materially different or not as a voting method. But it would certainly have to go through at least an abbreviated process of fairness determination by the judge for an amendment to the consent decree. And then the second part and for this I apologize that I've gotten, I guess, too old. 30 years ago, I could tell you the mathematics of 5 or 6 different types of voting systems in place around the world even. So there were even some Israeli examples, as I remember, in our research at the time. And what you're talking about, and there are many, I wasn't a political scientist, but if you are a political scientist, there are many vote counting methods in the world. And cumulative voting was I'll say the preference of the plaintiff class. I think that's where the idea first came from, frankly. And it is in many of the voting rights cases. But runoff elections, top 5, I mean, there are a variety of other ways. I'm just not equipped to tell you what the data shows of being adequate substitutes at this point.
Esquire, one other question, and this could possibly, can be definitely conjoined with a thought process that might give us all district council seats. What would it take for us to go back to a strong mayor, city council, and abolish the council manager form of government?
That's an interesting and challenging question because it would still require some action before the federal court in this consent decree, which the only thing the consent decree does with respect to our election law is it indicates that in unaddressed respects, the election code would be followed. It doesn't allow for a substitute system. To the extent it would be a structure and proposal to be evaluated, I think it could be a competitive solution for either the plaintiffs to examine or the court to find fair. But I really am not equipped to give you a very fair evaluation of it right this minute.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Oh, yes. Sorry, Councilmember Kelly, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hello, Mr. Lenzini. It's nice to speak to you again. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I've always had the impression that the cumulative voting that came out of the 1987 consent decree, the whole idea of cumulative voting was to offer a further avenue for minority people to get on the council. Is that your recollection as well?
I wouldn't, no, I don't think that's quite the way to say it, and I don't necessarily think, well, I mean, I see that there's some motivation or explanation that could be used that way. It really fundamentally is to arm the voter with more power in terms of being able, if they choose to, be able to use all 5 of their votes at once for their candidate of choice. That's really the side of the equation that the voting rights courts view.
Well, I understand that, but the reason for that, I thought, was to offer another avenue for minority citizens to, or minority candidates to perhaps more easily get on the council. I think there was a complaint, a legitimate complaint, when the suit was brought, that the at-large seats, of which I believe there were 3, would almost always result, if people vote racially, and I'm not so sure that they do, but if people vote racially, then that would always result in the majority winning those 3 seats. And therefore, the council would have perhaps an overrepresentation of the minority race, or the majority race. And I thought that's why they brought cumulative voting in. You don't recall that, or you don't agree that that was part of it?
Well, no, I mean, I think it is at least a little part of it. I guess I just would explain it a bit differently in this sense. First off, there's no question, and it's sort of buried in the voting rights statute and case law and court opinions, a proposition, and frankly, personally, I've always had a real difficulty with the proposition, but it's undeniably in the law that humans tend to vote for candidates of their own racial selection. And that's fundamentally part of the Voting Rights Act, because then the second proposition is their votes cannot be, any voter's votes cannot be diluted on a racial basis. And so that's where we get more to what you're talking about, in the sense that I think we had 250 depositions in this case, and we studied every election and almost every voter by regression analysis to show how every candidate had been elected in all 3 government bodies for almost 100 years. I mean, it was intensive research, and neither side could really prove what the history and data would show. That's one of the reasons it led to settlement, probably, because of the cost and the controversies that were generated over the time period. And clearly, one of the reasons the plaintiffs, in my recollection, insisted on 5 at-large, not 3, which was a hotly contested part of the settlement discussions, was that then the voter would be armed with up to 5 votes if they wanted to, plunk for one candidate, 2.5 votes if they voted for 2 candidates, that they would have the necessary power, so to speak, of their voting under the cumulative balloting to affect change, to elect their candidate of choice. So that, I mean, much of what you say is part and parcel of this debate. There's no question about it.
Okay, thank you. And I have a couple other questions. Well, it's my memory, which may be quite wrong, that the plaintiffs were all individual people. Is that correct?
Well, yes.
Is that correct?
We call these the named plaintiffs. They're really representative of a class.
Okay. Who then, once they pass away, who become the representatives of the class?
Well, in this case, this is a very broad class, so any voting age minority member of the Peoria city could be substituted as a class member. In fact, I think there were a couple of class members added during the pendency of the litigation. I'm going only on memory, but I believe there were 2 gentlemen that were added. I hate to say C.T. Vivian because I can't really recollect well enough.
That's all right.
And
it's just.
But it was certainly a leader in the minority community was added as a plaintiff member.
Okay. You've answered that, and that's fine. I would like to second, not in Robert's Rules of Order, but Mr. Riggenbach's and Mr. Lanzini's advice to separate what we need to do right now versus the census and this particular discussion, which I find interesting. Personally, I maybe, I don't know. I think I'm a beneficiary of cumulative voting, but I hate cumulative voting. I think it's very distortive. I don't really know how I did, you know. But I realize that it's not likely to go away. I think also that the success of the consent decree is quite questionable. We had 2 minority members on the council when that was brought, and we had 2 minority members on the council for until this go-round. Okay, nothing changed in 30-some years. So, but we need to hang on to this thing for I don't know what kind of reason. And in the meantime, I think the at-large elections are. I don't know how democratic they really are. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm curious, what is the specific definition of minority and majority in this discussion?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney Lenzini, but my understanding was that the voters' right lawsuit had to do with the African American population, and it did not use the word minority as a entire group.
You're correct, Mayor, in terms of the Peoria lawsuit. I think several of my comments have been more generalized in the sense of the voting rights litigation in the United States, of which there are, hundreds of cases that we have to sort of take into consideration for our circumstances. In fact, as I think I mentioned, but I should certainly mention that the vast majority of those the past 15 years, and many of those were out of California, have been Hispanic. They haven't been African American. The African American voting rights suits that I'm familiar with more recently have been a totally different part of the statute. They don't involve vote dilution. They invoke identification at the polls, any number of issues that are discriminatory.
Sure, but if we're speaking, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we're speaking to the Peoria lawsuit, what group does that pertain to?
No, that's African American, our plaintiff group.
Does that answer your question, Councilman Euler?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Attorney Lenzini? I appreciate your recommendation that we should separate the 2 issues in terms of drawing the maps and in terms of, looking at the structure. Any other comments or advice or recommendations that you have, Attorney Lenzini, as we begin to go through this process?
The one thing I would like to say, it's rather presumptuous of me to say this, but I want to publicly say you have my contact anyway, a superb number cruncher person on the staff there, Josh Navins, who even 10 years ago performed yeoman work for me and the school district, which the school district had benefited with the data crunching. That cost us over $200,000 30 years ago, and I think it cost us about $5,000 10 years ago. Wow. And I look forward, and I have talked with him about doing the same this year. But I think you should, and perhaps city manager or city attorney mentioned Josh earlier with credits, but he does a fantastic job. So I'll end on that note.
Thank you. We're going to rely heavy on him. I think they also purchased some software to help with some of, the the map considerations.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Councilmember Ruckriegel?
Thank you. And just, I guess, just for a little bit more clarification, and I think I heard it in here, but I want to make for sure I heard it correct, for Councilmember Euler's question. Usually there's the legal answer that comes forward in a judgment case, but there's also the spirit of the law, which sometimes has a little bit more ability to mature over time or to take on a different life on its own. So does a consent decree have that as well, or maybe that doesn't pertain in here? I think maybe what I heard in the answer was what the consent decree says is what the consent decree says. There is no sort of living spirit of that, which may be making that minority class more all-inclusive. Is that correct?
I'm going to defer.
It is correct, Councilman. I'll read you how Judge Baker ends his order. This court retains jurisdiction of this case for purposes of supervising the implementation of this consent decree. That's about as straight as you can make it. And if you know Judge Baker, he does not suffer fools gladly, and he does not take to interpretations of his orders.
Okay.
He's very strict.
Thank you. I've got a couple other questions, but I think those are more
Okay,
for around
go right
the horse.
ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, Phil, thank you for bringing your expertise to our meeting. Much appreciated. We may at some point reach back out to you. It also sounds like challenging the consent decree could be a very costly or possibly cost prohibitive type of venture. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be happy to help if I can.
Appreciate it. Council? Okay, so just to kind of see where we are with this, we're going to look at this whole structure in a whole different, we're not going to take this into consideration as part of drawing the maps. We need to draw the maps. We have the new census data. We know that there are some districts that have to be increased. There are some districts that have to be detracted as far as the population. 10 years ago, there was a committee put together of district council members. That's what was proposed to do again, district council members and myself, but it would still be brought back to this group for consideration for approval. If there's no objection to that, that would be on the next council meeting. It doesn't mean that at-large council people would not attend the meeting or could not attend the meeting. It just means that that would be the structure that we would use unless there's opposition to that. Councilman Ruckriegel?
Madam Mayor, I guess I just have a question about that as well. The reason that usually we don't do a committee of the whole is so that it's a committee that can bring it back to the voting body that can then have the other discourse as well. I realized that last time, correct me, City Manager, it was 5 people that were on that districting committee. And that allowed then for the final vote to be able to be handled here around the horseshoe. With any sort of formulation of 6, if it was be 3 at large, 3 district, however that would come, it would almost force the secondary vote here to be moot and no real discussion here at this point. I think the purpose of a committee is to have less than the voting majority of that's around the horseshoe. I would just throw that out as well.
It was 5 instead of 6.
Yeah.
Previously. So by adding myself, that creates another dynamic. Thanks for pointing that out.
And then just one other question, and maybe this is for our legal counsel or for city manager. Can you give us what our timeframes are here? Because we heard earlier here that we kind of have almost a year, but obviously there's some deadlines there that have to be hit before. What is our real deadline here, our drop dead date of when the maps have to be drawn and approved?
There we go. August of 2022. So you get 12 months from when your census data is received. What that doesn't take into account, however, are petition deadlines for other local offices. And like Attorney Lenzini mentioned, unfortunately for the school district, they are tied to a census tract for their reapportionment of the school districts. So they are looking for that information and looking for direction from the city as soon as possible.
But for our part, for our next election would be the at-large, correct? And those petitions would not go out until November, which would be after August. So by following through on that August deadline, probably we would push to get this done earlier, but if we happen to push up to that August deadline, we still are well within the ability to get petitions and everything else. Okay.
For our elections, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I don't think that we should rush the process. However, I think that, I would hope that we could wrap things up by first quarter of next year if possible. But what we have before us now is many dates of budget work. And I wouldn't want to begin those meetings until after we get an approved budget. Then we can begin to focus on the maps. But with the software, with the expertise of Josh Nevins, I think with some ongoing meetings and discussion, I would think that we could wrap things up by the end of March. Councilman Rodrigo?
And I would agree with you that to have this discussion and the budget discussion going on at the same time seems to be taking our focus off one when we do have a little bit of time on the other. It seems then we could make the transition over to this. Hopefully, though, we would also have plenty of time for public input on this. I kind of remember the last time that this came through. It doesn't seem like it was 10 years ago, but it obviously was. There was a lot of public discussion that came forward, and I want to make for sure that we have plenty of time for that because this is something that the community has then to live within those boundaries for the next 10 years.
Agree. And I mean, if you want at-large members to participate, we can make it a committee of the whole. I don't object to that at all. We want as much participation and as much transparency as possible. So it's up to you. Councilman Riggenbach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I personally think a committee of the whole would be an appropriate way to handle this, and that doesn't mean we have to have everybody, but as long as we have a majority, a quorum, we can conduct the meetings, and I think that just takes a little bit of the pressure off the district members drawing the future boundaries. It gives that perspective as from the at-large, and I would be supportive of that idea of making it a committee of the whole.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Kelly?
I very much respect my colleague. And I guess, and I would certainly participate if that is how it comes out. I don't know what the at-large members would really contribute. I know what you're saying, that it's a tough job. I get that. But it's like, well, that's not part of my thing. I don't want to interfere with it, Just
Councilman
my
Keller,
thought.
you mean contribute to the process of the map drawing, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. Either way it goes, I will be happy to participate or not participate. But those are my feelings. I don't know that as an at-large person. I don't know if I'd just be in the way. I'm sorry.
You haven't participated at all in the past?
No.
Councilmember Euler?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would shudder to think that that would be the impression of all of the work that the at-large members do here. I think that absolutely our opinion and knowledge of the city and its boundaries and the way that our community runs is of utmost importance to the at-large members, because part of our responsibility is to evaluate decisions as a whole and not just as a district-centric focus, and how we allocate resources and how we see moving the ball forward in the future of this community. So I think to have a more objective opinion, it's incumbent upon having input from the at-large council members. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll be a committee of the whole. Councilman Greb?
Yes, in Gulliver's Travels, there was some discussion about how the egg should be cracked. And in the final analysis, the egg's going to get cracked, and we're all going to be voting on it. So it seems eminently reasonable to include everybody instead of having a two-tier process. I don't think anybody should feel threatened by having 11 minds working on this, and I don't think anybody is. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, moving on, Madam Clerk.
We need a motion to close the policy session, please.
Okay, moved by Councilwoman Jensen, seconded by Councilmember Greb. Please cast your ballots. I think we're not picking up Ruck, Regal, and Euler. There we go. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
We are at regular business. 21-313 is a communication with a request to adopt an ordinance amending the special service area agreement between the City of Peoria and Westlake Shopping Center, and there is a handout on your desk revising Section 3 of the ordinance.
Council? Poska?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to give a little bit of an overview to the situation. In 2010, the city worked with the Westlake Shopping Plaza and Morton Community Bank to establish a special service area at Westlake. Since then, it has been amended a couple of times. Most recently, the rate was increased, I believe, from 0.5% to 0.75% to allow for some security upgrades to occur there at the plaza. A couple of weeks ago, we were approached by the developer looking for a second amendment to the special service area that would allow for him to obtain $2 million in additional financing to do a build out of the vacant Biaggi's space with a new tenant. In working through some of the logistics of what that financing may be, we noticed that this particular developer had a fairly substantial stormwater utility bill that was outstanding to the city. So in conversations with their attorney, we were looking for routes to have that bill paid before we put this special service area amendment before the council. We've exchanged a couple of drafts of what a potential catch-all or fail-safe, I guess is a better description for this agreement would look like. And what you have on your yellow sheet is one minor amendment. On page 2, under utility fee indebtedness to the city, this agreement would acknowledge that the parties, by both parties, that there is an indebtedness owed to the city for unpaid utilities in the amount of approximately $147,000. I will tell you that I did a quick check on that number today, and because when we first started working on this, the last quarter bills had not been paid, it did go up slightly. It's actually closer to $157,848.34. So that may be the number that we need to put in there. That was the number that was given to me, unfortunately, about 5 o'clock tonight. But it does mean that the sum of $75,000 would be withdrawn from the balance of the SSA and paid immediately. And then the remainder of the balance, if not paid from the developer, would be levied for SSA for 2021. That would be collected in 2022. And then in that regard, any further stormwater utility bills that would become delinquent could be an eligible cost out of the SSA. Patrick and I had a meeting with the developer and his attorney and Morton Community Bank this morning, and feel like this is the best route moving forward in order to allow for some substantial refinancing to occur at the plaza, as well as a line of sight on getting this outstanding utility bill paid.
Thank you, Counsel. Can I get a motion to approve? Moved by Councilmember Allen, Councilmember Ruckriegel? Second? No. Oh, you wanted to comment. Can I get a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Velpula. Councilmember Ruckriegel?
I guess, quick question in front of us. On the third, what would really be the third SSA request to come in front of us, the other two having been approved, does that change the time frame of the SSA, or are they looking for a tax increase to go in for the new SSA to be able to cover the costs long term? Because they're asking for additional dollars. So are they asking for an increase in rate or a length of time to be able to pay it back?
So the time frame does not change on the length of the SSA. The levy can change, and this is obviously a property tax levy that would be paid by the developer on that property that they have.
And I guess maybe for legal counsel, you're saying that the dollar amount has gone up from about 147 to 157. So how many years does this go back then, the 147?
To July of 2018.
Okay, so since the inception of this, there's not been a payment of this fee?
Correct.
And I think, is there some talk of maybe an appeal, which I think everybody has the right to appeal, is that correct?
An appeal is not currently on file, although Attorney Hall did mention today that he is trying to obtain the information from the developer that would justify an appeal being filed.
So I know that we've been, we have some limited staffing arrangements that have happened over the past maybe year or so. If an appeal is filed, how long does that take to be heard?
It would run probably in the weeks to get it done. It shouldn't take very long for us to process through an appeal process. It's going to require the developer to work with some engineers to submit some information, and then the engineers at Public Works would evaluate it and make the determination based upon the ordinance.
We've got a very important piece of property here, and I appreciate all the assets that they are improving, and I think they continue to reinvest and bring great experiences, truly experiences to Peoria. Morton Community Bank is a very good bank as well to work with, so I think we've got some very good players here. My concern and my question really comes from, if somebody's applying for a roof grant from us, from the city, from community development, do they have to have their taxes and fees paid?
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've when this came to us and we looked at it, we said we needed to make this change to the agreement in order to make sure that the city was getting paid.
But in most cases, they have to be paid up front prior to being able to apply. And we're not looking at 1 year. We're not looking at 2 years. We're looking at 3 years of non-payment here. And I think that I applaud, and I think the legal department ought to work with them. And it sounds like maybe an appeal is the right thing, if that's what's discussed. And I applaud that. I think this is putting the cart before the horse, because in this last election cycle, I think that we talked a lot about the proper use of SSAs. The other piece of this is changing is from the developer side, or from the property owner of that fee, it is now switching on to the taxpayers, which is one more additional change. And while you may say it's a minor change to this, to the taxpayer, I don't know that it is. The taxpayer who, by the way, if they own their properties, are also paying this fee each and every year for the past 3 years. I'm not opposed to looking at what it takes, because I think that there may be some value in this without this clause, but to be able to bring something forward prior to having all of your fees paid to the city, when we don't do that for the average homeowner on our programs, seems to me opposite of what most of us who were on the campaign trail, who won or lost, talked about the proper use of dollars. It's just, to me, this is not a minor change. And to get this, when we're sitting down, and Councilmember Sear is not here tonight, I know he hates the yellow pages, I know they happen sometimes, but to not have more time to be able to delve and get the answers to this, when we would be setting a precedent for other SSAs to be able to come and ask the same thing. And we would be now adding a third opportunity here, which, again, may be the right thing. This is too fast, too quick, with not enough. The foundation is paying your bills, and then come to us to ask.
Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Ruckriegel, for verbalizing much of the heartburn that I've been experiencing since I saw this agenda item. And to your point, the East Village Grow-Sell TIF has a housing program that we make available to homeowners who want to make improvements. I checked with Director Doolin, and he pulled out some of the guidelines, and one of them reads, the property owner cannot owe any fine, fee, lien, or tax to the city of Peoria. So there is absolutely no way I am going to be able to support this for a developer while I'm not allowing that for the residents of my district who are trying to make their homes a better place. We have a BDA under consideration for the Keller Station location. We have many shopping centers around town that have talked about SSA. The precedent that we would be setting by approving this, I'm afraid, would be very disruptive to the way that we have tried so hard to structure things. I'm also curious about the new tenant that's promised. Last time we were promised a new tenant by this developer in a very similar situation. They simply cannibalized another shopping strip and took a store that was already in town. So the new tenant doesn't exactly entice me as the thing that's going to allow me to be derelict in my fiscal responsibility and the fairness for my constituents. So I will not be supporting this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I appreciate the work that's been done on this. I've been included on the emails and things of that nature, so I appreciate Corporation Counsel, City Manager Urick, because this is a very unique case. I understand the apprehension of my colleagues with this particular case, especially when it comes to the delinquent stormwater utility fee. I do feel confident in the current proposal of us having a plan to get the money to pay this fee that is owed to the city. And this developer has been in our city and doing great things for our community, providing quality of life opportunities with the various storefronts and eateries that are there. I know that this is a tough time for businesses, and so I do want to give some grace and a level of empathy. So again, I do understand where my colleagues are coming from, but I do want us to consider just the impact that that shopping center is making into our city as we look to move forward. So I will be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Welcome. Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I spoke with the 4th District Councilman earlier today, and you, by the way, he didn't leave anything out. But based on our conversation, I told him that I would probably be supporting him. And in listening to the arguments here and a little bit of further thought that I've had, I probably will not be. One of the things that I'm reminded of in the Westlake SSA is that it was set up to be very runoff friendly, or to reduce their stormwater utility bill through the use of permeable pavers, etc. And that's what the SSA was for, I believe, if my memory is correct. And with that, there's been no payment of the stormwater utility fee. Give me a break. And now the property owner has a choice. He can get a higher SSA, which they're compelled to pay. Their tenants are compelled to pay. And you can say, my gosh, these taxes in Peoria are just going up and up and up. Or he can raise his rent to cover this, which I'm sure he doesn't want to do. Now, it's sort of one pocket or another, but it seems to me that the SSA is properly, for the stormwater, and for whatever reason, hasn't paid it, and then comes and asks us for a little bit more SSA. And the original proposition, I guess, had nothing to say about the indebtedness or the lack of payment of the fee. So I don't know that property owner's been operating in good faith, and so I'm sorry, Mr. Allen, but I'm going to go the other way.
Councilmember Graham.
Thank you, Mayor Ali. I see one of the best attorneys in town in our audience, and would it be possible for you to come up to the lectern? I have a question to ask you. If you ever need a development attorney, this is the guy right here. And this isn't the first time I've said this. Thank you, Attorney Hall. I think much of what Counselor Allen says is correct. Some remarkable things have happened in the Westlake Special Service area. Wouldn't it be better to bring this back once he's caught up with his obligations with the city and then revisit this?
I think under the circumstances that might be the best thing to do, yes.
I think it would be too, because what Counselor Allen said resonates with me. I've been a supporter of this in the past, and I just think that'd be the prudent thing to do. It's just my opinion. Thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Councilman Grabb's on top of it this evening, and my light was on to make a substitute motion to defer to the next council meeting.
Seconded by Councilmember Graham. Okay. Discussion continues. Councilmember Ruckriegel. Okay.
The next regular council meeting on the 26th, because next week is a special council meeting. Thank you.
It's back to the next regular.
The next regular scheduled council meeting,
Yes,
which is
okay.
the 26th.
Okay. All right, no more discussion. Please cast your ballots on the substitute motion. Passes unanimously. Okay. Madam Clerk?
21-314 is a communication with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance to amend Appendix A, the Unified Development Code relating to short-term rentals.
Councilmember Riggenbach,
Move for approval as presented.
seconded by Councilmember Kelly. Discussion? Councilmember Graham?
Thank you very much, Mayor Lee. This issue has metamorphosed in many different ways since the first short-term rental was approved on the consent agenda. I was on vacation for that particular meeting, and without any regard to a non-transferability aspect being attached to that first short-term rental that was approved. And to the council's credit, we have come along here to have hopefully a more intelligent process of viewing our, and I don't like to use the term Airbnb, because not everybody's going to serve breakfast. You can just rent a room. A lot of this has been romanticized, and everybody thinks it's just Airbnb. Short-term rentals encompass more than just those people serving breakfast. It could be those who are just renting a room, boarding house fashion. Unfortunately, I think this has been romanticized, and I think some of the reporting that's occurred locally has made it appear as if this is a David versus Goliath battle, when in actuality we have very strong commercial interests that have designs on many of the properties in our city and have been operating these boarding houses, these short-term rentals, without a permit. So along comes the idea, and Councilor Jensen, I believe, was very helpful in this regard of, gosh, we should let people in the neighborhoods know when someone wants to put a short-term rental next door. Isn't that amazing? Because there were those here who felt it should just be a matter of right. If you own the property and you live in Colorado, or you're an investor or whatever, by right, you should just be able to put whatever you want into that property with no notification to neighbors. So thanks to the collective intelligence of this council, we said, yeah, we do need to have notification of neighbors and a chance for them to weigh in and to run it through a very orderly process, which includes the Planning Zoning Commission and then our great staff, which I think our staff's done a lot of work on this. Director Doolin, if you're listening, I want to give you a lot of credit for this. But what we have been trying to do is balance the interests of the neighborhood with those folks who want to make some money in our neighborhoods. And maybe by making some money in our neighborhoods, they're also really improving a property. That's very possible. But it's also possible that we'll have commercial interests coming in that have no regard for the 88-year-old lady who lives next door, has a shared drive with them, 10 or 12 people going out of the house on the weekend with no permission from the city, even though the city told this particular operator that he had to have a permit. This is simply maddening. It's not the way it should be. So what we're trying to do, I believe, as a council, is come up with a way of doing this that doesn't allow destructive commercialization of our legacy neighborhoods. Now, Director Doolin, since I was very nice referring to you a few minutes ago, one of the things that I asked you to do, if you could, and to do it for the benefit also of the Planning and Zoning Commission, was to provide a map of the city so we could see what the implications would be for the city as to how many of these we could potentially have and where they would be located, both in terms of those we have identified as not having the special use permit and those areas of the city where they could be located if they go through the special use permit process. And then we have, of course, some areas of the city where they're allowed by right. Have you been able to come up with anything, or has this been too confusing to put together for the council?
Thank you, Councilman Grape. I believe it's easy for staff to identify the areas where short-term rentals are allowed by right. Essentially, that's almost all the zoning districts in Peoria outside of R1, R2, R3, and R4. In addition, we think we have a good grasp on the locations of the current Airbnbs, VRBOs, things of that nature throughout the community based on what's being advertised online and the software we have. Right now there's about 60 to 70 locations. Some buildings have multiple parcels, so about 60 total property parcels that are operating short-term rentals at the moment. About 25 to 30 of them which would require short-term rental special use. I think the hard part is to create a map that shows where each area could go, because not all areas are encompassed by a neighborhood association. So the 0.25 mile radius that is in item 3 of the attached recommendation would apply. So it's hard to give an exact estimate of where they're at, but essentially what the recommendation says is not more than 3% within an area neighborhood association based on the map we have, or if you're not located within there within a 0.25 mile radius. The 0.25 mile radius was kind of what we looked at, kind of a median of most of the neighborhood associations in Peoria. So I know it doesn't answer the exact number that the city would allow based on those percentages, but all of them that are currently operating would follow these standards and the other current standards in place based on what we know now from the ones currently being advertised.
Director Doolin, I know that Council District 2 is truly second to none. We know that. My constituents agree that we're second to none. But we have to have the ability to absorb these in a logical way, and we have had some discussion about what that percentage should be. And I think staff came up with that 3% figure. If you have a discrete ETE, neighborhood association envelope, is that correct?
Could you repeat the question?
For example, the Uplands, about 383 houses, staff's recommending 3% of that housing stock could conceivably have short-term rental, a boarding house in it, correct?
That is the recommendation that staff brought forward based on the council discussion 2 weeks ago.
What part of the council discussion did you hear 3%? Because I think I was here, and I'm not sure I heard anybody saying 3%, although that might be the case. Where did you get that?
I believe that was the discussion. I would have to go back and listen again if I was heard incorrectly.
Well, maybe one council member said that, but you have gone through, I don't think we voted on it. You ran the 3% number past the Planning and Zoning Commission without complete information as to what the ramifications would be for more than just District 2, for crying out loud. I mean, these can be lots of places in the city. And then we somehow come up with a radius of 1/4 of a mile. 3 blocks, we can have no more than 3%. That seems very arbitrary and very capricious. And I'm just wondering if some of my fellow district council members, not to mention the at-larges, really understand or can get their arms around what this will mean in terms of neighborhoods where most people want their neighbors to be their neighbors, not people who are there in a transient way, in and out. They don't want a lot of mini hotels. I've said this before, and I'm willing to work with the council on something that makes sense. But I don't know where we get these arbitrary figures and how in the world we can wrap our arms around these numbers. Councilman Riggenbach, no negativism, but how we can get around 3% and 1/4 of a mile or 3 blocks radius where we don't have these residential associations and where we don't have restrictive covenants, how we can make that decision without seeing it up there in terms of implications of what it means for our neighborhoods. Now, there are neighborhoods in our city that really aren't going to be that impacted by it. Dover Point, for example, where a former employee lives now. I mean, it would require 80% plus 1 to allow any short-term rentals there. And so it goes as you go through the territory of the city of Peoria. So as District 2 councilman, a council district second to none, of course I want to be sure that if we have these are done right and they're going to complement EMENT our neighborhoods. The other thing that crosses my mind, Counsel, and I'm thinking out loud now, you know, when things go wrong with these, and they will, and they already have, you can talk to the gentleman on Moss Avenue who bought the house next door after several months, I think years, of putting up with this crap next door. When things go wrong, what's our enforcement capability? We know our police department is stretched thin. Our code enforcement, Director Doolin, I don't know how you get the work done that you're tasked with, especially with our older housing stock. Are we going to have more staff able to enforce this? Where's the enforcement going to come from? We can't even keep up with the code enforcement issues we have now. So I just think that we need to discuss this a bit more. Now, you might think, well, he's just trying to stop it. Well, maybe I am, in the sense that I think we need to take a deep breath and really see what this map's going to look like. Because there's going to be a lot of work coming real quick on these short-term rentals and approvals and whatnot. And how we're going to be able to inspect these when there are problems is beyond me with existing staff, unless the manager is going to pull a rabbit out of the hat, and maybe he will, to really beef up code enforcement that can be dedicated to ensuring that these properties are worthy of a certificate of occupancy and that when something goes wonky, that they're brought back to home base. Maybe you have something in mind there. But I think until we see more pieces of this puzzle, we should be very careful not to approve these particular numbers without further discussion. Now, one of the council members I spoke to, with whom I have the highest regard, you, said, well, you know, there are some communities that have 5%, so maybe I'm just being too hard on this whole thing. But last I looked, folks, Peoria is not a vacation resort city, okay? Last I looked, the West Bluff neighborhoods, 61606, are the most densely populated neighborhoods in the city outside of Chicago. And I happen to represent that area, so I guess that's why I'm a little concerned that we get this right. And we're right there in the shadow of our fourth biggest employer, Bradley University, and we have all kinds of speculators just looking at these areas. And I know, because I heard one of my fellow counselors say this, oh, there are a lot of contracts hanging out there, weighing in the balance, waiting for this council to decide if these people could descend and purchase these properties for short-term rental work. Really? Commercial interests coming into our neighborhoods must be regulated and regulated very carefully. I guarantee you can look at research, other communities that have done this, they have been very sorry that they did not do it differently than how we're doing it.
Council member,
Yes.
finish your thought. I'll come back to you. I just need to go around and hear from some other council
Yes,
members.
I'll just wrap it up by saying it's too soon for us to vote on these fractions. And without further information that I already asked staff to provide, so we would have a visual, and I asked the PZ Commission to have the same visual. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Mayor Ali. I, along with Councilman Grab, have concerns about the proposed limitations. As you all know, I'm also a resident of the 2nd District and a 26-year resident and longtime neighborhood advocate who has spent my whole 26 years working hard to maintain and actually strengthen these older neighborhoods that are going to be most impacted by these short-term rentals. And I don't think this 3% limitation is going to sufficiently protect neighborhoods like Moss Bradley or the Uplands. If it's a 3% cap, that means we can have 9 short-term rentals in the Moss Bradley area. That means there could be 9 on Moss Avenue within the next few months. We have 4 or 5 houses for sale right now, and I know 4 or 5 that are about to go on the market. In the Uplands, which is even more densely populated and a smaller footprint than Moss Bradley, this 3% cap would mean that there could be 11 short-term rentals in their neighborhood, which I believe is only 11 or 12 blocks. This is not sufficient protection for these neighborhoods. Additionally, the limitation of 6 adults, non-related adults, is not consistent with our current zoning laws. Currently, if you have a dwelling or a house in a single-family residential neighborhood, you cannot have more than 3 unrelated people in that house, in that dwelling. We require that of long-term rentals, and we require that of all other properties in those neighborhoods. And throughout the years, we've used that ordinance to get some of these houses that were overoccupied, that had 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10 students. They were overcrowded and they were disrupting the neighborhoods. And we used that ordinance, and it's still used. You can ask Director Doolin to ensure that the houses in our neighborhoods that are being rented out are not over-occupied. So that at least should apply to these short-term rentals. And under this proposal, we're allowing short-term rentals to have more people than we let long-term rentals have. So I agree with Councilman Grab that this should be a little more thought out. I appreciate staff working on this so quickly because I do understand that, this is a big issue. There's a lot of speculators waiting to see what we're going to do before they buy properties. I have talked to Director Doolin about 2 other ideas that actually came to me as I have been meeting with property owners of rental properties and short-term rental properties, and a group that manages short-term rentals throughout central Illinois. And 2 things that they suggested to me that we should look into that Director Doolin said he would, and he asked me to mention them here. One is that a lot of cities in the area that do allow short-term rentals, they have the company, like Airbnb or whoever the company is, that is authorized these people to do the short-term rentals. They actually collect the city fees and taxes through Airbnb directly to the host. So they get paid up front when the host pays the fees to Airbnb or whoever the company is that they work with. So I'd like the city to look into whether or not we can do that. I think it could save administrative costs up front for the city, and it would ensure that we get paid those fees right away. The second item is that a lot of cities, it's my understanding, that allow short-term rentals and have fairly strong Airbnb presence, they only allow licenses for people to rent out their properties as short-term rentals if they are approved by Airbnb and other similar companies. So that way, Airbnb and whoever the other providers are doing some of the legwork. They're making sure that the host is a good host and that the travelers or the guests are good guests. If they've had issues with them or complaints about them, they pull their approval and they're no longer on their approved list. And I think that would be something that would add another layer of protection to the older neighborhoods. So I don't know if Mr. Doolin, if you want to comment on that.
Thank you, Councilman Jensen. We'll definitely look into both of those and get a report back to council.
Okay, thank you. I know I've gone over, so I'm very passionate about this. I hope the rest of the council will just consider the concerns that have been raised by the residents that live in these neighborhoods. We're not against short-term rentals. We just do not want our neighborhoods to be saturated with them. And we would like to take it slow. So I would suggest that we start at 1%. And then when we have 3 or 4 in our neighborhood and we see how those operate. And then if they're operating fine, then we could always expand that limit. Thank you.
Councilmember Euler?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I guess I'll express my first disappointment in all of this is the fact that all of these great ideas for restrictions were not uncovered and pushed to resolve during the year that we spent analyzing this and having public input. And then you go on to the fact that this council already passed this short-term rental process many months ago. That vote particularly led by some of the council members who now have this opposition and newfound idea that we need to come up with some more restrictions. Then you fast forward to a few weeks ago where we decide that we need to do another deferral because we still can't figure out exactly what we did and where we want to go with this. And that we are going to give us a couple more weeks to try and find a way to come together here and come up with something that works more so for everyone. We agree to do that with the understanding that we would actually come back with something finally figured out this time. It's disturbing to me, and I'm disappointed to hear that Councilman Grab was not included in any of those discussions when staff told me that they had discussions with Councilman Grab on this topic. And so here we are again, talking about needing to come up with some more restrictions and kick this ball down the road some more, while today I get a phone call from a resident of the 2nd District who owns one of these properties and has now been fined for it. So we pass an ordinance, we allow people to go out and purchase properties and begin this process, and we are now fining them when we can't even figure out what we want in this ordinance ourselves. This has reached an absolutely unacceptable point. If we want to continue to dig into this and come up with more solutions, we can do that, but we need to start moving forward with what we told the public we were going to move forward with months ago when we passed it, what we told them we were going to move forward with at the last meeting when we agreed to come together on this and vet out any additional potential restrictive solutions that we were going to add. It's time to move the ball forward on this and start to do what we need to do in our community, which is what we told the public we were going to do a couple of different times now. It just astounds me that we are now fining people over this when we can't figure this out ourselves. It's time to move. It's time to vote on this tonight and start to get something going. And I keep hearing this corporate takeover of our neighborhoods, saturation of our neighborhoods. 3% is not saturation and corporate takeover of our neighborhoods. I'd be more concerned about the Bradley student housing that's in the neighborhoods than what 3% of this is going to be in them. I too am a resident of the 2nd District. I live in a heritage neighborhood, and I'm by no means concerned that, my neighborhood is suddenly going to be taken down by 3% of this. I've talked to many of the individuals running these, and the people that are coming to town and looking at them are people are using them are people that are coming to town to look at our neighborhoods to potentially buy and relocate here. They want to have an experience in our neighborhood to decide if that's where they want to be. They're coming here for job interviews at OSF. They're coming here for funerals. They're coming here to scout out potentially going to our Bradley University. They're not coming here to go to the beach and have a party. They're not coming here to go to the winery and drink all night after they go and check out what's happening at the wineries down Galena Road. They're coming here to check out our community and see if this is somewhere that they want to live and spend time here and, by God, spend their money here. And that's what we're worried about is going to happen. I mean, we've really gone down the wrong path. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to address a couple things, and one of them is the 3 items that the Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed for us was a specific request that the council, by a 10-to-1 vote, asked for. If you look at the minutes from the last meeting, we did discuss these 3 things, and it was even brought up by me. He suggested a 3 to 5% limit on short-term rentals in neighborhoods or within set boundaries. Previous to last council meeting, Corporation Counsel and Director Doolin and the city manager, we were brainstorming and looked at other cities who have that 5% cap. So we ratcheted it down to 3%. That clearly, what's before us isn't going to be anywhere near 3%. With the cumbersome special use process we put in place, if we feel 1% is the appropriate cap, we can vote them down then. I just don't understand how last 2 weeks ago we voted 10-1 for this, and now the whole thing blew up on us. regarding Councilwoman Jensen's ideas about having Airbnb or Verbo collect the taxes and fees, I think that's a great idea. And clearly that's something that can be implemented at any time. That doesn't need to delay the process. And I like her idea also about saying if they're on the Airbnb or Verbo website, if they're licensed by them, then perhaps we could make it take away the special use requirement altogether, since we'll have that additional safeguard. So great suggestions, and I look forward to voting on this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Graham.
Mayor Lee, I'll be brief since I went over it last time, but I respect Councilor Euler a great deal, and Councilor Riggenbach. And Councilor Riggenbach, you made the motion to defer so we could cogitate some more on it, but honestly, I don't know if maybe I missed something, but this 3%, 0.25 mile radius, I didn't see it until a few days ago coming from staff, and that's when I commenced further discussions with our city staff about it. So I don't think this is something that's been out there for us to think about for more than a few days. But I mean, coming from staff, with a recommendation from staff to be on the docket tonight, I didn't contemplate that. Heck, we were hustling trying to figure out what 3% would mean for Moss Bradley. We already knew what it was for the uplands. But let's think about North Florence Bigelow. Let's think about elsewhere in the 2nd District, Biltmore Heights. The rest of you district council people need to do your math on this, what it means. I certainly cannot support this threshold until we can see this visually. But I do appreciate the fact that my fellow councilors have been willing to work with us on this to this point, but I'm not trying to frustrate this. Believe me, I'd like to get this thing behind us. But I want to be sure it's done right. And that's why I'm saying it'd be instructive just to see these on a map and to see how it affects the whole city, not just District 2, because this is going to be more than a District 2 issue. Trust me, it will be. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Seeing no more discussion. Does everybody know what the motion is? Okay.
The motion is to adopt an ordinance
ahead.
to amend Appendix A.
Yes. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes with 3 nays, Graham, Jackson, and Jensen. Madam Clerk?
21-315 are appointments by Mayor Ali to the Housing Commission with a request to concur of Nicole Livesey, Michelle Sanders, Vaibhav Shah, Jane Gensel, Cheryl Boswell, Donna Crowder, Christelle Aboites, Becky Peterson, and Councilmember Tim Riggenbach.
And I would add that all the individuals listed, with the exception of Becky Peterson and Councilmember Tim Riggenbach, were previously on what was called the Fair Housing Commission. So they're being reappointed to the new commission, and then these 2 individuals would be added. That leaves 3 vacancies still to be filled on this commission. Can I get a motion? Moved by Councilmember Jackson, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Any discussion? Please cast your ballots. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry about that. Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Mayor Ali. I just noticed, since you mentioned that there's still 3 vacancies on this commission, I just noticed reviewing it, it's pretty heavy where it looks like several of the members live in the 5th district, and hope that we'll take that into consideration for the vacancies to make sure that it has some people that live in the older neighborhoods and our neighborhood advocate people when you consider filling the other three.
Okay, absolutely. And, it was also leaning gender heavy with women, so we wanted to also balance that out. So we are looking to make sure that it's diverse. Thank you. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes with one abstention, Councilman Riggenbach. Madam Clerk?
21-316 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to receive and file the 2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, audited by Clifton Larson Allen.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have our Finance Director, Kyle Crotty, is here, as well as Adam Pulley from Clifton Larson Allen, who's here to talk about our audit and for 2020. Mr. Pulley?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure. We did put together a short presentation. I'm not sure if that has been circulated or not. If not, that's okay. I can hit the highlights regardless. Name's Adam Pulley, principal in charge of the December 2020 financial audit of the city's financial statements, joined by Justin Noor and Brian Mattis, who are also key members of the engagement team. Our audit report, at the end of the day, did result in an unmodified or a clean audit opinion on the city's financial statements. Within the 250-page document, there is included a award from the GFOA for the 2019 city's financial statements. I don't know how many years running the city has had it, but once again, that was something that was obtained for last year's financial statements and is included within that report. Perfect. It is worth noting that we did cover the audit of the entire financial statements outside of the two pension funds as well as the foreign fire insurance fund. Those are audited by other auditors who we do refer to their opinions. Their opinions were also clean on what their portions of the audit were. I know I've recommended in the past, and I will do so again. Obviously, it's a large document. A good synopsis of the document is a management's discussion and analysis, which is towards the front. If you want to take a look and get a good sense of 2020. Obviously, a lot within these slides here is historical information in a sense. It's FY20 and some is comparing to FY20 or FY19. Really, probably the main thing I want to highlight on this slide here is a big financial change for the city that occurred in FY20 was the recognition of a environmental remediation obligation liability for the combined sewer overflow. So at the end of 2020 in December, there was the decree that had come down. I think that was something that was anticipated. And as far as accounting standards are concerned, once that decree hit, that was essentially a triggering event that requires that the liability be recognized on the city's financial statements. It is worth noting that this is just a liability on what we call the full accrual statement, so this includes all the capital assets. Think about it in the same way as a net pension liability. It's not a liability that shows up within an individual fund. But when we bring it up to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, that's where that liability gets shown. And accounting standards, by the nature of this liability, would say the entire estimated liability needed to be recognized right away. And as it gets paid down or worked through, that liability will be adjusted going forward. So with that liability, that caused a change in net position of a negative $149 million because the liability itself was $147 million. Comparing that to FY20, the change in net position was a negative $2.6 million. On this slide here, I will just note that the change in total fund balances, so this would be the level of accounting you are probably more used to seeing, or financials that you are used to seeing meeting to meeting. That change, if you take the total funds together in FY20, was a decrease of $98,000. Last year, 2019, was an increase of $27 million. That obviously sounds like a big change, but really that had to do with timing of debt issuance proceeds and payments. That's really what caused that to be off last year. As far as the business type fund, the stormwater utility fund experienced an increase of $7.3 million compared to FY19, which was a $3.7 million increase. These next few slides, again, are really just comparing 2020 to 2019. I'm not going to spend any significant time on these. So going forward, you know, I did mention we issued an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements. In addition, we also perform an audit over the federal grant programs, compliance with federal guidelines. We issued an unmodified or clean opinion on that as well. Now, as far as findings are concerned, we did have no findings on the federal compliance piece. We did have one finding over the financial statement process, and that would be one that did happen last year as well. Material audit adjustments. The vast majority of these audit adjustments are us assisting the city with converting from the fund level of accounting to that which is generally accepted accounting principles and which is required in order to submit the financial statements for that award with GFOA. So that's the vast majority of those audit adjustments that we assisted with. That's our only finding. One other recommendation we came across that did not reach the level of a finding, which is something we did note last year as well. We continue to recommend to management of the city to investigate the calculation of depreciation expense. 2-3 years ago, during the conversion of financial software, it was noted that the carryover of depreciation expense calculation was not really coming over accurately. Relatively small differences, nothing that was material that caused a material finding or things of that nature, but it's something we continue to recommend just because it could potentially accumulate over time to become a larger number. Lastly, we did also issue a letter to governance, which is our opportunity to express to council if we came across any disagreements with management, any significant issues. And really the most noteworthy item this year is the fact that there was a delay with the issuance of the financial statements and the audit report. That was issued in late September. When we set out to try to issue by the end of June. And as I'm sure everyone's aware, there was a good amount of turnover in the finance department. A lot of institutional knowledge went out the door at one point. At various points, I should say, different individuals were wearing different hats, and so we got a late start, and the process was certainly a little slower this year than it had been. That said, certainly want to thank the finance department that was wearing those different hats that maybe they weren't anticipating going into the audit this year, and of course, new members of the finance department that were trying to help through the process and answer questions during a fiscal year that they may not have even been around here for. So I can only imagine how difficult that would be. Honestly, that's really the highlights I wanted to pull out and report on as far as the audit concerns. That brings me to a close in my presentation.
Do we have copies of this presentation? I didn't see one.
I don't know if we have copies of the presentation, but we can certainly make copies and send them out to everybody, or send an electronic version out to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Counsel, any questions? Councilman Velpula?
Can you go back to the one more? Yeah. So what was you said there were errors when there was a transition to a new software. So what were the numbers that were missing there? You know, the numbers. It says it's even though it's insignificant, what was the percentage of error that you found out when the transition happened? What was the percentage? Yeah. Offhand, I'm not sure what the percentage is. It's something we could potentially go back and look, but I can tell you that when we sampled and then we sort of extrapolate it out and accumulate it to see if there's a potential material misstatement. There was not a material misstatement as a result of that. And it's something that we looked into last year, looked into this year, and the figures did appear to change. So that's why I have a little bit of a concern that potentially going forward, that immaterial nature could become more significant. So that's why we continue to recommend just taking a look at that. Thank you. And I know some efforts have been made in that regard. It doesn't seem to be a simple solution right away. So we will be using the same software going forward? Yes, that's my understanding.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. We like the words clean audit. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to follow up on Councilman Kieran's question, I think what you're saying is that this error was small. Okay. And are we better off for it or worse off for it? In other words, were we over depreciated or under depreciated?
If I'm not mistaken, and this is from memory, I believe it was over.
We were over depreciated.
Yes.
Okay.
Accurate.
Okay. Thank you.
Head nods behind me, so I think I have that correct.
All right.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation. Thank you to the manager and the finance staff for your good work. Much appreciated.
Everybody.
Madam Clerk? We need to receive and file, don't we?
Yes.
Okay, moved by Councilman Riggenbach, seconded by Councilmember Allen to receive and file. Get your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
21-317 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to receive and file the 2022 through 2023 biennial budget.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What you have in front of you this evening in the binder is the 2022-2023 biennial budget. Tonight, what we're really asking you just to do is to receive and file this. We've filed it with the clerk, which we're required to do, and that really kind of starts the budgeting process. We would come back next week with a full presentation about the overall budget. I think in quick summary, what I would say is that so far this year, we're in a much better fiscal position than we were in all of last year. So we are coming out of the recovery in a much stronger position than we anticipated. We thought we were going to end this year with a surplus in the general fund of about $1.75 million. That number is going to be considerably higher, probably closer to $10.8 million, while it also will allow us to pay back the debt that we have in our capital budget of about $8 million. So that's a considerable improvement. I think we are seeing, and we saw today with some of the income tax numbers that have come in for the most recent month, for the October distribution. There's still, the state shared revenues are coming in very strong. The change in the state law that changed how we tax internet purchases is showing that our revenues are coming in considerably stronger because of that as well. But I think, we also looked at that as really being a high watermark as we look at this, because we're starting to see that some of that federal assistance for individuals is going to start to fall off. So we can't expect that that kind of spending level and tax receipts are going to be there forever. So the budget that we'll get into next week really does talk about that, talks about how we're trying to be a little more conservative with some of those revenue projections going forward. To Councilman Kelly's point, where we talked about our capital budget, the capital budget that's presented here in this budget is $34 million higher than last year's capital budget as we try and catch up on some of the capital spending that we have. There's also some recommendations with regards to replenishing some of our staffing cuts and restoring some of the staff that we did reduce, about 38 positions, which would increase our headcount overall. That would be in our direct line departments, such as Public Works, Code Enforcement, and the Fire Department. It would also be working very closely with the police chief on filling the vacancies that they currently have in the police department. He's slotted right now for 30 positions to go to the PTI to fill in the police academy next year. That would move forward with that as well. And then, obviously, as we discussed at the last policy session on the American Rescue Plan, we've talked about putting in some funding for the American Rescue Plan, and we've beefed it up, trying to front load it to where it's $10.2 million of funding focused on the areas that we talked about earlier of economic development, neighborhood stabilization, infrastructure improvements, violence prevention, and public health. So those are the kind of general overviews in this. The good news is that we would, by the end of 2022, we think the general fund reserves will still be at $19 million unobligated compared to the 11 that we were talking about here, unobligated in the 2020 budget. So we've improved our condition. That will set us at about 19% of the fund balance goal. So we've made some considerable movement as well with that. And we'll be happy to get into this in much greater detail with you next week as we sit down in that special meeting.
Thank you for that summary. It's a lot to digest, so spend time with it. And I know everybody just got it today, so we don't want to get into the details. Motion, Councilmember Riggenbach, seconded by Councilmember Kelly, to receive and file. Any other? Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you. Mr. Manager, will there be a separate discussion on the COVID money?
There is, it's incorporated into the budget request. So as you look at this, it's incorporated completely into the budget request. If council wants to go in a different direction with those dollars, that can be something that can be made from a motion of the council members and can be acted on at that point. But this is, my recommendation incorporated the ARP spending, the funds, inside this budget request.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. And that's something that we talked about, not operating in a vacuum with regard to our ARPA, but many expressed the need to look at the entire picture. So.
Me.
Any other comments? Okay. Councilmember Jensen?
So does it designate in here? I mean, I haven't been
Yes.
through it since we just got it.
Yes, it does. The recommendations of the pots of money for the ARP funding is specifically called out in the budget message, so that we can work through that. And I'll break that out in greater detail next Tuesday evening for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a point of clarification. So the meeting that's a public hearing for October 26th, is that going to be allowed for the public to come and give input, or are they just really listening to the budget presentation?
No, it's a public hearing. We open the floor here at the council meeting for the public to come and weigh in and offer up any public comment that they have. And we would look forward to hearing from members of the public at that point in time. We have to schedule it, we have to post that and notice that, and that's the reason why it's on that budget calendar.
Okay, thank you. As a rookie to the proceedings, I just appreciate that clarity. Thank you, sir.
Good question. Thanks. Okay, no more questions. Okay. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted some clarification, Mr. Manager, on how disbursement of the COVID funds would be allocated under this budget. I know you had listed categories, like for neighborhoods and things of that nature. While you have listed those categories, does that leave open for, say, for example, if there's a neighborhood group that wants to try to get some of this money for youth in their nonprofit community center, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll be happy to talk about our proposed suggestions in terms of how we've outlined that at, next Tuesday night for you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Manager, not to be too argumentative, but my first experience with the budget considerations, I didn't look forward to, and as it turns out, as far as I was concerned, I thought it was a terrific exercise. And I think that opinion was shared kind of generally. There were probably a few people who didn't like it. Why aren't we doing that again this year?
In which process are you specifically talking?
When we were meeting across the street with the consultants and we went around and said, okay, what are your priorities?
So that was more of a strategic planning process, and in discussions with the mayor, we're going to come back to the council with some suggestions on a larger strategic planning process, a more engaged process with the community as well, and we'll be bringing that back for the council's consideration in a couple of meetings.
Those were considered budget discussions, if I'm not mistaken.
They were. It was more of a strategic.
We created a budget.
It was a strategic planning process that fed into the budget. We were using it to develop kind of the budgeting for outcomes model that we used at that point in time. And then, quite frankly, the pandemic hit, and we spent all of last year really talking about budget every month.
I understand that. I just wonder why we didn't do that again, because I think it was a very successful thing. It's all right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Okay. A motion to receive and file. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
We are at unfinished business. 21-274 is a communication with a request to concur with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class R4 single-family residential district for a short-term rental at 1514 West Columbia Terrace.
Councilmember Graham.
Mayor and Council, I have every confidence that the petitioners here for this particular address will do an outstanding job. I enthusiastically move to approve as outlined.
Seconded by Councilmember Riggenbach. Any other discussion? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimous. Motion passes with one nay, Jensen. Madam Clerk?
21-275 is a communication with a request to concur with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class R4 single-family residential district for a short-term rental at 1030 North Elmwood Avenue.
Councilmember Graham.
Mayor Lee and Council, careful evaluation, as you know, I'm going to be doing on each of these. Careful evaluation tells me that the process of deliberation within the council has made this something that I can support. Director Doolin, I believe at one time we would have allowed 10 folks to possibly be involved in a short-term rental situation at this address. Is that correct?
Yes, thanks, Councilman. The max occupancy by the Building and Fire Code is 10 individuals, but based on the change made earlier at the council meeting, of those 10 individuals now, only 6 of them can be adults, which should alleviate some of the parking concerns and other issues. So the occupancy stays the same at 10, but of that 10, only 6 may be adults.
And so this has materially changed this, has it not, because of the way we voted a little bit earlier tonight?
Yes, it would cut down on hopefully some of the parking issues that might come if there were 10 adults and they all brought cars separately to the property.
The Planning and Zoning Commission was going with a larger number because the council hadn't acted yet in a much more intelligent fashion, I might add. Given that change, I move to approve.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Riggenbach. Any other discussion? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes with 1 nay. Jensen. Madam Clerk?
21-299 is a communication with a request to concur with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class R4 single-family residential district for a short-term rental at 1314 North Sheridan Road.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I need to get your attention here.
Okay. Question? Go ahead.
Yes, Director Doolin, on this one, could you outline the features of this particular address by way of parking and maximum number of adults allowed?
Yes, sir. They did have, based on their site plan, off-street parking available at the property, and they're requesting a max occupancy of 4 people.
How many bedrooms are there?
1 second, sir. I believe it's a 2-bedroom house, but I'm double checking the application. 1 second.
I cannot move to approve this one until I get that detail. So on this note, I'm going to move to defer it.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilman Member Ruckriegel. Any other discussion? Is this move to defer to the next regular
regularly
council
scheduled,
meeting?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, the motion is to defer to the next regular council meeting. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes with 1 nay. Kelly. Okay, Madam Clerk.
We are at additional unfinished business.
We are at unfinished?
Yes, if anybody has additional unfinished business, it
Oh.
falls under this category.
Okay, all righty. Any other unfinished business? Okay. Any new business? Okay. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to invite everybody to the East Bluff Community Center this Saturday. They are having Bids for the Bluff from 2 to 5 o'clock, and it will be an outside event, a fundraiser for this organization that is becoming a real stalwart in the neighborhood. So East Bluff Community Center this coming Saturday. And also, I just wanted to point out to my colleagues that our capital investment dollars are hard at work. Nebraska corridor, which I have championed relentlessly. Thank you very much for your support on that. Has been milled and overlaid. The sidewalks are in, and we are starting to see the fruits of our planning here. So if you haven't driven down Nebraska between Knoxville and Wisconsin, take a look at your tax dollars at work. It's very well spent. Thank you.
Fantastic. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I haven't done shout outs in a while, so I want to just sprinkle some positivity in the air. I want to give a shout out to the Yanni Collective. They put together the Sophisticated Ratchet Art Affair this past Saturday. It was a great event. It was an art show, a fashion show. A lot of creators were there. People came from St. Louis and Chicago, Memphis, Atlanta, and obviously here in Peoria. It was right down in the warehouse district, and it was just a great time. It was good to see a lot of people. Our very own Chief of Police walked in the show. Chief, I had to shout you out. You might have a secondary career, but so shout out to Chief Echeverria for participating and really getting involved in the community. But I definitely just want to shout out that group for putting that amazing show together. And then I also want to send a huge shout out to Miss Lorraine Bryson. She officially retired from the Tri-County Urban League a couple months ago, but we acknowledged her this past Sunday at the annual jazz brunch that the Urban League hosts every year. So just want to say congratulations to Miss Bryson. I hope you have a wonderful into retirement. You enjoy it, and I hope you find yourself on a beach here soon. And I yield. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed both of those fabulous events. Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Mayor Ali. I have a question for the city manager. It's my understanding that the city was going to apply for funds through the Volkswagen settlement. Possibly, my understanding was that there's $106 million that was awarded to Illinois that'll go to local municipalities. And some people at the Sierra Club were advised that the city was going to apply for a grant for possibly charging stations and other things. So I'm wondering if the city did that, if we're planning to do that, if you know anything about it.
What's the funding source again? I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, it's from the settlement from the big Volkswagen case.
If you can get me the information, we'll be happy to look into it and get your report back. It doesn't come to my mind, but it may not. There may be other staff that have been talking about it and looking into it. So if I can get some more information, that would be great.
Okay, I will do that. Thanks.
I'm interested in hearing more. I heard about the settlement, but I didn't know anything came home. So.
I think we have to apply for it, but
Okay.
yeah.
Any other new business? Councilmember Graham?
Thank you, Mayor. I think all of you have received, if not, you will receive an invitation to the new medical clinic that is opening up where the Golden Corral used to be at War Memorial Drive, roughly War Memorial Drive and University. It's more like Meadowbrook Road and University. And also, we have good news to report. It's a matter of public record that on the other side of the street, we're going to have another credit union in town. The IH Mississippi Credit Union will be occupying one part of that parcel there across the street from Beechlers. That's a big plus. I've had many of my constituents say that that's great because the nearest IH Mississippi Credit Union physical presence would be in Kankakee. So this is good news, and there are a lot of good things happening in Peoria. We're, of course, bombarded with all the negative, but there are good things happening, and I thought I'd make those remarks tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. There are no citizens that have completed information to address the council. Do we have an executive session? No executive session. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilman Euler, seconded by Councilmember Valpula. Please cast your ballots. Thank you for your service.